Chapter 531. Cyril put his phone away. He had no idea why Olivia would suddenly ask that question. He wondered if she had found something. He went to the surveillance room in person. The villa was situated halfway up the mountain. Surveillance cameras were installed along the path to the estate. If any car went up the mountain, they would have noticed it while it was at the foot of the hill. Then, they would keep watch on the vehicle in real time. This was a remote place, and a mansion was also built there. Ordinary people wouldn't normally come here. Even if some hikers occasionally came to the mountain, they would be told to turn back halfway through. Usually, only the millers' cars were seen in this area, transporting various resources. No strangers would be in sight. After looking at the footage for a long while, Cyril didn't notice anything off. Cyril's gaze moved downward. He noticed that a few surveillance cameras on the bottom had blacked out. Those cameras were installed on the cliffside. The cliff was steep, and the water level was on the rise these days. With the raging waves and heavy rain, the cameras might be ruined by the waves. People couldn't climb up the cliff even during the day, much less in the harsh conditions at night. Cyril made sure that there weren't any suspicious people or cars on the path up the mountain. Then, he left the surveillance room. He had already confirmed that nothing was off, but Cyril kept feeling uneasy about it. He felt as if he had overlooked something. But he didn't know what it was. A figure suddenly flashed across his mind. It was Warren, whom he had met once yesterday. The two only shook their hands when they met. After that, Mona took Warren into the ward. Cyril felt that he would only get in the way, so he left. It was only now that he remembered the man's strong grip. The area between Warren's index finger and thumb was filled with calluses. Mona once said that her upperclassman was working on academic research overseas. It didn't make sense for someone who always used computers and pens to have calluses in that area. Unless, Cyril looked at his hand. Warren might have an identity like his, where he would always be holding guns. That was the only reason why he had those traces on that spot. Cyril thought back on it. There was something suspicious about the accident Mona's younger brother got into. He wasn't seriously hurt at all. Cyril thought about the possibility of the accident being a bait to lure Mona away. Warren's true target might be Olivia instead. There could be something wrong about the bracelet Mona so fondly admired all day. If a tracker were inside, then Olivia's location would be exposed. Cyril shook his head. It was too much of a coincidence. Also, he couldn't think of anyone who would set up this trap. He felt like he was overthinking it. That was what he thought, but he still felt uneasy inside. He got ready to call over more backups for the night shift. He had to make sure that there were no mistakes. He had just dialed the number when he heard a woman screaming. Ah, it was Mona's voice. Cyril turned on the walkie-talkie and called for backup as he ran toward the room. When he barged in, he saw the phone Mona left on the bed, with its screen still lit. The window was wide open, and the cold wind blew in, sweeping the white sheer curtains outside. Cyril picked up the phone. The screen was still showing the conversation between Mona and Warren. Warren's icon was pitch black. It was only after he zoomed in that he could make out a figure in the darkness. The corners of the person's lips were curled up like a phantom. His gaze fell upon the last message in the conversation. Warren, darling, I'm here. Cyril's eyes went wide. He wouldn't think that Warren had rushed over to meet his lover. Olivia was in danger. Cyril looked down. He saw the whole cliffside covered in people who wore bulletproof vests and helmets. There were also gliders constantly landing above them. Cyril couldn't believe that they had chosen to land in such a risky way. It made sense now that no figures could be seen on the surveillance footage along the road. That night, Ethan tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep as he listened to the thunder outside. Olivia didn't like rainy days at all. On stormy nights, she would always lean into his arms. There were a few times when Ethan got out of bed, wishing to go over to Olivia. But then, he remembered how much Olivia hated him. So, he would only be affecting her emotions if he went there. The doctor said that she should avoid mental burdens. So, Ethan lay down again. But he didn't feel like sleeping at all. Lightning flashed across the sky again. As the thunder rumbled, Ethan got up once again. He could keep his distance from Olivia, but he had to go. "Kelvin, get the car." The car was halfway there when his phone rang. It was a call from Cyril. He had sent Cyril to protect Olivia. Cyril wouldn't have called him so late at night if it didn't have anything to do with Olivia. Ethan felt extremely anxious. After answering the call, he hadn't even spoken a word when a gunshot sounded on the other end of the line. Cyril's voice rang out breathlessly. "We're in big trouble, Mr. Miller." Chapter 532. Olivia pulled the covers over her head, feeling a little annoyed by the thunder outside. She covered her ears firmly, trying to go to sleep as soon as possible. The more annoyed she felt, the harder it was for her to fall asleep. Also, she kept feeling a chill run down her spine. She felt like there was a voice in her mind telling her to run. She didn't know where she would run to or why she would have to run. She had already called Cyril, and many people patrolled the villa 24/7. If there indeed were a problem, they would have noticed it already. Olivia shook her head. She had to stop herself from thinking too much. She even started to hear things. After struggling for a long while, she still couldn't fall asleep. She took out the gun Jack gave her half a year ago. It could help her feel more assured, at least. The two babies in her tummy were probably tired from kicking around. So, they grew quiet. The thunder and sound of waves hitting the reefs came one after the other. A cold breeze blew in. It was only then that she realized that half of the gauze window was open. The wind moved the heavy curtains, coming into the room in gusts. Olivia got up to close all the windows. Just then, she heard a scream coming from the next room. It was Mona. Olivia wondered what happened to her. Leaving the windows, Olivia went right to the door. When she opened the door, she saw a fully equipped man jumping onto the balcony outside her room. She couldn't believe that someone would choose to risk their lives in this weather. If they fell into the sea, they would be dead for sure. Olivia thought of that assassin organization Ethan spoke of. Someone had spent a considerable sum to get her killed. She hastily backed away. Then, she slammed the door shut. Mona was dashing over to her in the corridor. When Mona saw the message, she instantly knew that something was off. At that moment, all the fantasies of romance in her mind had disappeared without a trace. No matter how stupid she was, she knew that any average person wouldn't climb the cliff in the middle of the night. She was duped. She couldn't be bothered to think about the problem. The first thing she did was put on her shoes and run. Fortunately, the window of her room was locked from within. Before the person could open the window, she hastily fled to Olivia's room. The two exchanged glances. Mona was so terrified that she couldn't form a complete sentence. Guys, bad guys. Olivia had experienced quite a lot before, so she was calmer than Mona. Let's go. Those people wouldn't dare to come in from the front door. They chose the path with the worst natural conditions. It wouldn't be easy for them to climb up here, so Olivia and Mona still had time to escape. But Olivia was burdened by her huge tummy. Even if she wanted to run, she couldn't run fast. Mona couldn't carry Olivia on her back even if she wanted to. So, she could only take Olivia's hand. Mona's palms were sweaty. She kept mumbling, "How can this be? Warren, there's something off about Warren. It's all my fault. I led him to us." Even now, Mona didn't know how Warren found this place. Before she went back, she even asked the driver to drive around the city. Lastly, she got into the specialized car. She was very sure that she wasn't tailed. It's okay. All our people are in the front yard. We'll be safe soon. They're already on their way here. Olivia was calm. All the people Ethan left for her were elites. This place was securely guarded, so the attackers might fail. Are you okay, Mrs. Miller? The bodyguards' voices sounded in the distance. I'm fine, Olivia hastily responded. Just then, a bullet ricocheted. Olivia, look out. Chapter 533. Someone caught up to them. He was wearing waterproof clothing and had goggles over his eyes. Even though his jaw was the only exposed body part, Mona could recognize him right away. It was Warren. At that moment, she wished she could open her mouth and ask him why he did that. She wanted to ask him who he was. In the next second, she saw the man raising his gun. He was aiming at Olivia. He didn't say anything unnecessary, nor did he show any signs of his arrival. He came here for Olivia. At that moment, Mona couldn't see the Warren she knew in this man. He looked like death itself. He was drenched because of the rain. Raindrops slowly dripped down the slick surface of his clothes. The wool carpet in the corridor turned wet. When he pulled the trigger, Mona didn't even think twice before she stood in front of Olivia. The bullet dug into the flesh. Olivia heard a groan ringing in her ears. Olivia's pupils caught the image of blood sputtering out of Mona's body. In the next second, the body standing in front of her slowly slid to the floor. Mona, the man who shot her, didn't break his rhythm at all. He stepped toward Olivia. He behaved as if he hadn't hit a living human being at all. It was Mona, the woman who loved him for so many years and only had eyes for him. The crimson blood seeped into her pajamas, and it also soaked into the white rug. Mona wanted to say something, but because of her damaged organs, blood kept streaming out of her mouth. She summoned all her strength to reach out. She looked at the man approaching her with a reluctant gaze in her eyes. She asked the question, "Why?" But that man couldn't even be bothered to waste his breath on her. He trained his eyes on Olivia. Crouching, Olivia used all her might to hold Mona with one arm. Her fingers were painted red by the blood as well. "Mona, you'll be fine. We have doctors here. It's not a fatal injury. You won't die. Olivia, run." Warren had raised his gun once again. This time, he aimed right at Olivia's head. A shot would kill her instantly. The gunshot sounded. Olivia saw him, but she could barely get up with her heavy tummy. She couldn't escape at all. At that moment, Mona used up all her strength to jump up. Once again, she blocked the bullet with her body. Another bloody hole appeared on her body, and blood spattered onto Olivia's face. Olivia screamed at the top of her lungs. Not even 30 seconds had passed before the second shot sounded. Finally, Olivia heard the man's voice. It was clear and melodious, and there seemed to be a tone of pity in his voice. "Why would you go so far?" She was like a fish on the verge of dying. Mouthfuls of blood gushed from her mouth. "Olivia, run. Just run. Leave me." But Olivia was already stunned. She looked at the bloody hole in Mona's chest. It was a fatal injury. Mona couldn't survive this. Olivia couldn't believe that this was happening. "Run, run." Mona helplessly let out one last shout. As Warren raised his gun, 3 gunshots rang at the same time. The shots came from Olivia, Warren, and Cyril, who was behind Warren. But the shots from Olivia and Cyril had landed on Warren's bulletproof vest. He didn't die, and Mona used all her energy to protect Olivia with her body. The last bullet pierced her skull. Blood trailed along Mona's face, falling onto Olivia's face. With her arms as support, she protected Olivia like a meat shield. "No, no," Mona painstakingly smiled at Olivia. I told you. I swore that I'll protect you. Farewell, Olivia." Chapter 534. Olivia's pained walls resounded throughout the villa. Cyril had just dealt with the man who was running out of Olivia's room. In the end, he was still too late. When he saw the blood spurting from Mona's chest, he felt as if his heart had turned numb. After all, he had undergone professional training. Even if his relatives had fallen in front of him, he wouldn't pause his mission. Cyril saw that the man was wearing a bulletproof vest and, hence, unharmed. Lunging at Warren, Cyril engaged in close combat with him. Olivia lowered the gun in her hand. Her mind was buzzing, and she could only see red. Mona's body fell limply by her side. Blood tainted the bracelet on her wrist. The pendant she had praised before was now covered in blood. It lay on the floor with her body, never to get up again. Olivia knelt on the floor, tears pouring out of her eyes. She wanted to block the wounds with her hands, but the blood kept flowing endlessly. "Mona, hang in there. The doctors are coming soon. Mona, don't die. You have to stay alive. You have to be alive and well. We promised. When I've given birth to the children, you'll help me take care of them. We're even going to travel to various countries." Mona, she wiped her tears in a hurry. She didn't even realize that the blood on her hands had smeared her face. "Mrs. Miller, leave this place right now. It's dangerous." The voice of a bodyguard reached Olivia's ears, but Mona was the only thing on Olivia's mind. "Where are the doctors? Get them here right now. Mona is already dead. Mrs. Miller, you can't stay here. Let's go." More assassins had successfully landed, and gunshots were ringing out in the air. The bodyguard had no other choice. "Pardon me, Mrs. Miller." Bending over, he picked Olivia up. "Mona." Before Mona died, she happened to be looking in the direction Olivia was leaving. Mona's dead eyes stared right in Olivia's direction. Blood and tears blurred Olivia's vision. She couldn't leave Mona alone in this place. The babies in her tummy were also startled awake by the sudden turn of events. They kept kicking around in her belly. It was only then that Olivia regained her wits. She finally remembered that she still had her children. Mona had sacrificed her life to protect Olivia and the children. Olivia couldn't let Mona's sacrifice go to waste. So, she stopped struggling. She let the bodyguard sprint with her in his arms. As soon as the war started, they no longer had the option to back down. Explosions and gunshots rang in her ears. The bodyguard who was carrying her didn't look back. Several men were accompanying her. Someone held up an umbrella for her. But the rain was too heavy, and they were running too fast. The rain that poured at an angle still pelted Olivia's whole body. She was only wearing thin pajamas. With the wind blowing on her and the rain drenching her, her body shivered in the chilly wind. She didn't know if it was because of the cold or her overwhelmed emotions. "Don't be scared, Mrs. Miller. We're getting there soon." Olivia was carried into a modified bulletproof off-road. Cody and the driver were already prepared to take her away. "Hold tight, Mrs. Miller." Gunshots sounded endlessly behind her. Olivia wanted to turn around to look, but Cody covered her body with a blanket. Holding Olivia in her arms, she said, "Don't turn around. Don't look." Olivia knew that there would be people injured and killed. Those people had been with her for half a year. She was already familiar with them all. Some weren't that much older than her. They were like older siblings to her. But at that moment, they were fighting for her. Olivia's tears streamed silently as her hands gripped Cody's arm. She kept recalling Mona's face before the latter died. "Mrs. Miller, calm down. Don't cry. Do not let it affect your children, or it'll easily lead to premature birth. You've only been pregnant for 6 months. Children born prematurely have a very low rate of survival. You have to persevere for the children." Chapter 535. Olivia knew that very well. But after experiencing something like that, she couldn't calm her emotions at all. Patting her on the back to soothe her emotions, Cody spoke in a gentle voice. "Don't worry, we've already moved Mr. Fordham away. He's fine, and you're okay too. This is the best outcome." Olivia doubted it. She had lost a good friend moments ago. The car sped along the road. At that speed, they would be able to get off the mountain and enter the circular route in a little more than 10 minutes. Rain fell in dense sheets. Even with the wipers frantically sweeping, they couldn't clear out the incoming rain. The mountain was very foggy. With the heavy rain and strong winds, it wasn't easy to drive under such conditions. Everyone was anxious, and the children had been kicking in her tummy for a while. Olivia kept touching her tummy to soothe the children. In a sobbing voice, she said, "Be good, children. Don't make a fuss. I'm here. I'll protect you." As she coaxed, the children seemed to have understood what she was saying. They stopped kicking, and Olivia's tummy gradually settled down. Cody let out a sigh. "Don't worry, Mrs. Miller. We'll get off the mountain in a few minutes. Then, we'll..." Before she could finish speaking, a piercing high beam shone in their direction. A large truck rounded the curve at high speed. It was too late to dodge the truck. The attackers had already planned all this. They would attack from both the rear and the front. They were determined to kill Olivia. Cody screamed. Her fingers gripped Olivia tightly, preventing Olivia from any collisions. The urgent screech of brakes sounded on the mountain road. If they collided, the off-road vehicle would be ruined as well. Even if it weren't ruined, it would still be a strong collision. As soon as Olivia's tummy suffered any impact, the children would not survive. When that happened, both Olivia and the children would die. The off-road vehicle was going at a high speed, and the road was also very slippery on rainy days. The sudden brake caused the steering wheel to malfunction. The vehicle crashed through the guardrail. It was an even worse situation. The sea was right below them. If the car fell into the sea, its passengers were bound to die. Olivia's body tilted. Even at times like this, Cody didn't give up on her. She protected Olivia with her body, determined to stave off any impact on Olivia's tummy. With a splash, the car fell into the sea. Fortunately, the bodyguard was also professionally trained. While they were still in the air, he had already opened the car door. If the car fell into the water, they wouldn't be able to open the car door because of the intense water pressure. The bodyguard held the armrest tightly with his hands. He wanted to prevent Olivia from falling into the sea. When the car slowly began to sink, he swam swiftly to the back seat, bringing Olivia out. Cody was a good swimmer, and she was also a military doctor. She maintained her calm as she followed them. Olivia could only move one hand. The bodyguard told her to grab his neck. Olivia wasn't a fool, either. She knew that she shouldn't panic at times like this. She kept calm, trying her best not to cause trouble for them. As long as she relaxed her body and didn't struggle, she wouldn't sink. After Olivia held her breath for half a minute, the bodyguard brought her to the sea's surface. She greedily gulped in the fresh air. "Hang in there, Mrs. Miller. We'll be able to get to shore in 3 minutes at most." Okay. Olivia's tummy was already beginning to hurt. She was panicking, but she knew that there was no better way right now. She had to stay calm. 3 minutes. She only had to hold out for 3 minutes. As the pain in her tummy increased, she bit her lip in agony. "What's the matter, Mrs. Miller? I think my water broke." Chapter 536. When Cody heard what Olivia said, she panicked. "Please tell me you're kidding, Mrs. Miller. I've given birth prematurely in the sea before. This feels the same as it did back then. Hold on tight to me, Mrs. Miller." Owen Pullman couldn't afford any mistakes. He swiftly swam to the shore with Olivia. Dragging Olivia out of the sea with all his might, he took out an emergency light. Olivia was drenched in water, and Cody wasn't sure if it was seawater or Olivia's water breaking. With a cold expression, Cody said sternly, "Let me have a look." Other than the water breaking, there was even blood streaming out. Cody's expression changed. "Oh, no, Mrs. Miller, your water broke, and you're also bleeding." If the water broke, this meant that the children would be born prematurely. But now that Olivia was bleeding, the situation just got more complicated. The rupturing capillaries near the membrane might be the cause of the bleeding. But if the blood came from the babies, then they were done for. Olivia's tummy hurt terribly. At that moment, she was barely breathing as she spoke, biting her lip. "Dr. Wells, save my children." Cody looked at the cliff. They couldn't climb up the cliff with a pregnant woman who was about to give birth prematurely. There were even enemies up there. Even if they could wait, the children couldn't. Cody made her decision swiftly. "We have no other choice. Find a good place. I'm helping Mrs. Miller with her delivery right now." Owen scanned the area. He finally found a rock that was a little flatter than the rest. It had a part that jutted out, perfect for shielding them from the storm. "Mrs. Miller, please hold on. We'll go over there for the delivery." With that, Owen carried Olivia in his arms. Then, he climbed toward the spot under the rock. Olivia was already enveloped in pain. She couldn't hear the sounds of the wind or rain, and she couldn't feel the cold, either. The pain in her tummy spread throughout her body. It was so painful that she felt like she was being torn apart. She could sense the children moving down. Her face was filled with tears, for she had already lost a child once. Compared to the pain, she was even more worried that the tragedy would repeat itself. Usually, fetuses over 7 months old had a very high chance of survival. But those who were only a little more than 6 months old had a low chance of surviving. At this stage, the baby's organs weren't fully developed yet. Even in hospitals, it wasn't easy to keep them alive. They might not be saved even if they were placed into incubators right away. Much less could be said of deliveries under these circumstances. Owen lowered Olivia's body. Then, He immediately took off his coat and placed it under Olivia's body. He also passed his phone to Olivia. "Mrs. Miller, please get help. Dr. Wells, I leave the rest to you." Someone had already noticed that Olivia had been rescued from the ocean. The assassins climbed over the railing, scaling the cliff as they descended. They were determined to kill Olivia. Gunshots sounded above them. It was a good thing that the rock was thick and heavy, so it served as the perfect shield. Also, the cliff was steep and covered in moss. It wouldn't be that easy for the pursuers to descend. Owen was betting on that difference in time. He found a place to take cover. While those people were coming down, he shot at their legs. It was already difficult for them to remain stable. So, as soon as their legs stopped working, many of those people rolled down the cliff. Meanwhile, Cody adjusted Olivia's posture. She said in a stern voice, "Don't be scared, Mrs. Miller. I'll make sure you're safe. No, protect my children. You have to save them." With tears running down her face, Olivia pleaded as she dialed Ethan's number. The call went through soon enough. There were also noises on Ethan's end. "Where are you?" Ethan's voice was urgent on the other end of the line. "Ethan, it's me. Liv, are you okay? Did you get hurt? Don't be afraid. I've arrived." When Ethan heard Olivia's weak voice, he urgently asked about her current situation. My water broke. The children are being born prematurely. When you go up the mountain, you'll see a stretch of broken railing. We're right under it." "Ethan, enduring the pain." Olivia breathed heavily. "I don't care what you do, but you must protect the children. Even if I die, I want the children to survive." Chapter 537. Olivia set her phone aside as soon as she finished, giving Cody cooperation. "Mrs. Miller, I can't perform surgery given the circumstances. You're on your own. You have to push them out as soon as possible. Otherwise, the babies will be suffocated to death. Just push. Your cervix is open." Olivia could feel her babies' heads falling downward. They were tossing and turning in her womb, possibly because of the absence of amniotic fluid. Together, Olivia and the babies gave their last-ditch effort like a fish flapping on land. "Babies, you have to make it through this. Your father is coming to pick you up. You'll be fine. Everything's going to be alright. Mommy's here. I will never give up on you guys, so don't give up." Even though she had experienced this before, the second experience gave her more fear and pain. Her whole body was shaking. She wasn't sure whether it was due to fear or the cold. The other line of the phone was noisy, but Ethan's voice never fell into silence. "Liv, I'm coming. Hold on a little longer. Liv, I love you. I love you with all my heart. Don't leave me no matter what happens. The babies will be fine, and so will you. Liv." Olivia didn't have the energy to speak anymore. From afar, she watched how Owen finished his bullets. Yet, the enemies were swarming over like a colony of ants. When one of them fell, another one would replace them immediately. Who was it? Who had so much money to hire so many mercenaries? What kind of grudges was the opponent holding against Olivia? Olivia wondered if it was Leia, but her hunch denied her speculation. Leia wasn't the kind of person to spend so much money on this kind of matter. The pain numbed Olivia. Her left hand was digging the moist soil to stave the pain off. Her eyes slowly lost their focus as she gazed at the pouring rain. It was as though time had returned to when she lost her first child. Would it be a reenaction of the tragedy tonight? Would she lose her children again? "Push, Mrs. Miller. I can see the head." Cody's encouragement pulled her senses back to reality. Her fingers dug into the soil. Olivia, who was snapped out of energy, gave her best to push. Only one thing was in her mind: she had to give birth to them safely. "Babies, I'm in this with you. You have to stay alive. You must," she thought. While she was pushing the baby out, Owen suffered a gunshot. He had bought a lot of time for her. He looked at the 8 men bulldozing in their direction like zombies. Despite the impending danger, Cody paid attention to the delivery. "One of the babies is out, Mrs. Miller." "Baby, my baby." The weak Olivia broke into a smile. Now that one of the babies was out, the other followed smoothly behind. "Let me see them. Hurry." Her voice was welt. But Cody's expression didn't look great. Mrs. Miller, they're dead. Chapter 538. Wow, what did you say? They must be suffocated during the delivery. Don't be sad, Mrs. Miller. It is rare for a baby to survive when born in week 24. Your well-being matters the most. You're still young. You can still have babies in the future. No, I don't believe that they're gone just like that. I've taken care of them for months. 1. Mrs. Miller, the assassins will be here soon. We must leave. No, I will never abandon my children. Cody couldn't care much about it. She received the order to protect Olivia, and the babies came afterward. When the babies and Olivia were in danger, Cody had to put Olivia on the top of the list. I'm sorry, Mrs. Miller. Cody carried Olivia on her back. The latter watched her babies, who lay lifelessly on a jumble of clothes with teary eyes. No, my babies. Cody crawled up the cliff with difficulty as Olivia was on her back. Although she was stronger than average people, thanks to regular training, carrying Olivia on her back rendered it difficult. The rain poured, accompanied by the unforgiving waves. Cody didn't dare to look back. She threw a gun to pass it to Owen. They climbed up the cliff, with one covering the front and the other covering the back. The men chased after Olivia. No one spared a glance at the dead babies when they bypassed the place. They had one target, which was Olivia. The person at the back of the line stopped in his tracks to carry the babies. The babies were cold and mushy in the rain, like puppies abandoned on the streets. He patted their backs, causing them to cough up amniotic fluid before crying. He opened his waterproof clothes and hugged them against his chest, warming them up with his body temperature. The babies stopped crying. The only cry let out of them was drowned by the sound of the wind, waves, and gunshots. Olivia, who was very far from the babies, felt something. Dr. Wells, let me go back there. I heard the babies crying. Mrs. Miller, I've placed my finger beneath their noses. They weren't breathing. You must be hearing things. No, I'm positive that I've heard it. Let's bring them along. They're my babies. My precious babies. I'd rather sacrifice my life in exchange for theirs. Sorry, Mrs. Miller. I've promised Mr. Miller to protect you no matter what. The babies are dead. They're just bodies. Bringing them along will only be a burden to you. Olivia couldn't stop crying. She could feel her lower body part bleeding. Her condition was no better than the babies. Her life would be in danger if they didn't treat her anytime soon. Pictures began flashing across her mind. The bedridden Jeff, Mona, who had taken a gunshot for her, and her babies, whom she had never hugged once. Olivia supposed that she was a reincarnation of Satan. This was God's way of punishing her. Right then, Owen's right leg was shot. She looked at Cody, who was carrying her while climbing up the cliff. The sharp edges of rocks scratched Cody's skin. Her palm was bleeding. Is it worth it? Olivia suddenly popped a question. Cody was stunned. She clearly couldn't follow what Olivia meant by that. What's wrong, Mrs. Miller? Is it worth sacrificing so many people just for me? Chapter 539. Don't overthink it, Mrs. Miller. Hold on, Mr. Miller will be here soon. This is our mission. We will protect you no matter what happens. Thank you, Dr. Wells. Thank you for looking after me for the past few months. Olivia's sudden remark at such a time made Cody feel uneasy. Do not give up, Mrs. Miller. We will get out of here. We will. Get out of here. Where to? Olivia raised her head to look at the somber sky, and only raindrops pattered on her face. Actually, I know that my father is not left with much time. He can stay alive until today only because of the machines and medicine. He has long lost the will to live. Mrs. Miller. Dr. Wells, my friend once told me that I was like a small sun that shines brightly. But the luminance that emanated from me slowly dwindled. I'm wrapped up in darkness. I had a muddy period myself. At that time, I tossed and turned and struggled. I didn't want to admit my fate, nor did I believe in destiny. Even if a faint ray of light recurred in my life, I held onto it with all my might. I treasured it. I carefully held onto it, which revived the wish to live in me. But I still lost everything in the end. Not only that, why did the people around me have to suffer, too? It's not your fault, Mrs. Miller. It's the mastermind's fault. Olivia was still immersed in her thoughts, and her eyes were empty. No, it's my fault. I'm the cause of your suffering. They wouldn't have died if it wasn't because of me. The people around me are bound to be unfortunate. I don't want to drag you guys into this, Dr. Wells. Let me down. What are you talking about, Mrs. Miller? How can we give up on you? I will protect you until my last breath. Cody wore a serious expression. Why, you're all so precious to your parents. I'm not going to live long anyway. You have a beautiful life waiting ahead of you. Olivia began struggling to come down from Cody's back. When she finally caught her balance while standing, she shouted at the men in black, "You want my life, don't you? Fine, take it. Do not hurt other people." Owen had fallen on the ground. Now, one bullet was all it would take to end his life. Still, he didn't give up. Mrs. Miller, no, the leading enemy stomped on his chest. It's best you have that sense in you, Miss Fordham. Our target is you. As long as you're dead, we won't hurt anyone else. And our job will be done here. Everyone will be happy. Before I die, I wanna know who the person who wants my life is. Sorry, we don't know anything about our benefactor. Even if we know, we won't spill it. This way, Miss Fordham. If you come with us on your own accord, I can at least protect your dignity and let them go. For your information, many of my friends died just to kill you. Cody quickly grabbed Olivia's hand. Don't think of doing anything, Mrs. Miller. Do not give up until the end. You have to live. You must. Olivia gazed at Cody deeply, who was only 30 years old and unmarried. Olivia felt that Cody had a bright future ahead and that her life shouldn't end here. Dr. Wells, please live a good life if I'm dead. Do bring your children to me when you have a family. Mrs. Miller, Cody wanted to say something, but she didn't utter a word in the end. Do you know what the most painful thing in life is? It is not being able to protect any of your children when you're the mother. Had I known this would happen, why would I even care for them? I gave them life to bring them to this world, but they didn't even see the morning sun once. I'm a sinner with grave sins. I should go keep them company. They're so little, they must be scared to cross the river Styx alone. After that, Olivia broke free from Cody's hold and jumped into the sea. She could scarcely hear an agonizing scream along the wind that shouted, "Live, goodbye, Ethan. May our fate end here," thought Olivia. The moment she fell into the sea, she felt calm. She let herself sink deeper into the sea without struggling. She thought, "I'm here for you, my babies. Please wait for me. I'll bring you guys to River Styx. Let's stay together forever, okay?" Chapter 540. Olivia dipped into darkness, running quickly all alone. She thought, where are my babies? Where are they? One thing was on her mind. I should hurry and find my babies, or they'll be scared. She ran for a very long time, not knowing when to stop. Suddenly, a ray of light shone ahead of her, and she was standing on a field. There was a bridge made of a rainbow at the end of the field, leading to the opposite side, where it was covered with clouds. A figure slowly appeared on the opposite side of the rainbow bridge. It was Mona. She was clad in the same dress she wore while picking Olivia from the airport. She waved her hands at Olivia as always. Mona. Elated, Olivia dashed toward the rainbow bridge. The moment she stepped on the bridge, two brisk voices resounded. "Mommy." She looked back only to see her two babies. The boy resembled Ethan, while the girl looked like a mini Olivia. "I finally found you." Olivia crouched to hug them. As she reached out for them, her fingers passed through their bodies. She looked at her hands in disbelief. Her body was turning transparent. How could this be? Her children were right in front of her, but she couldn't touch them. They smiled at her like the dazzling sun. "Live a good life, Mommy." After saying that, they pushed her into an endless pit. Olivia stretched her arm as pain clouded her eyes. "No, Mona, my babies." She fell into a deep hole in darkness. Her eyes shot open suddenly. "Babies, my babies, live, you're finally awake." Ethan's anxious voice rang into her ear. She scanned around. There were no sights of her babies and Mona. It was the hospital that reeked of disinfectant odor. The ceiling was white, and the IV drip dripped steadily. A while later, she finally regained her composure and muttered, "I'm alive." Olivia looked at her hands. Her right hand couldn't move, and the scratches on her left hand reminded her of how she dug the soil during the delivery last night. Right, the babies, she thought. Where are my babies? Where are they? She yanked Ethan's collar. His face darkened. He didn't know what to tell her. Liv, get some rest. Once you recover. She grabbed him like a mad woman. Tell me, where are my babies? They're dead. Dead. Tears began pooling in her widened eyes as though someone had pressed a button in her. She didn't move at all. Ethan hugged her gently. Liv, we can still have babies in the future. That remark ticked the bomb off. She shoved him away with all her might. Get away from me. I don't want you. I want my babies. Don't move. You might suffer from a blood reflux, he reminded her. She cast her gaze down at the back of her hand. There was blood at the end of the tube. It was already happening. She removed the tape and next the needle. Blood began oozing out of her skin. Red stains appeared on her bedsheet. The color was so striking due to its contrast with the white bedsheet. She looked at her bleeding hand. Why did you save me? It should have let me die.